Today is August 29th, and tonight, just after sunset on the East Coast, will be the anniversary of one of the most daring operations attempted by General Washington's army in the year 1776. I'm Mrs. Q. Thank you for watching. Now, if you haven't seen my prior two videos leading up to this, you should take a look at the one I posted on August 22nd, about August 22nd, when the battle for New York began, and then August 27th, 2 days ago, the old stone house. And those will help you better understand this story. Now, this story is so incredible that the best way to hear it and to really enjoy it is standing in the spot where it happened. And I did exactly that a while ago. So let's watch that video.
Hi, it's Karen Q, and I'm here at the corner of Water Street and Maiden Lane and Lower Manhattan, site of one of the most important events of the American Revolution on August 29th, 1776. So if we try to pretend that this is August 29th, 1776, well, it's raining like it is today, so that's pretty good. And Water Street is Water Street, but was the shore at that time. So looking across the street, the other side of Water Street would have been the shore of the East River, and we would be standing out on a little pier sticking out into the water. Now, both in front of me, or to my right, and behind me, to my left, would have been a whole sequence of commercial docks that lined the east side of the island. All of New York's commercial traffic went in and out through this part of the island, and there would have been docks extending in each direction. And the dock that we're on, if I walk out here a little bit, faces Brooklyn, or Brooklyn Heights, and it's a little hard to see in the foggy rain, which is kind of appropriate for the story I'm going to tell. So we're going to be walking out to where today the shore is so that I can tell you this great story. So I'm going to say goodbye here for a moment and walk out to the shore, and we'll meet up again there. All right, so I'm back, and looking in the direction we came, we walked about 4 blocks, or about a quarter of a mile, closer to Brooklyn. Up there is the FDR Drive, and I'm going to turn around here. In front of me is the East River, and across there in the fog is Brooklyn Heights. And Brooklyn Heights is shrouded in a bit of fog today. I don't know if you can see it, but over there where the cars are going by on the Brooklyn Queens Expressway would have been the shore at that time. So for us, for our story at least, the East River is about a mile wide in 1776. Now down there to the south is New York Harbor, filled with those British warships. And if we look around to the north, there's a pier blocking our view. There's the masts of a 19th century ship here as part of the South Street Seaport Museum. And beyond that is up to the Long Island Sound. And of course, right over there is Brooklyn. Now, on August 29th, 1776, Washington and his forces woke up over in Brooklyn Heights to find themselves surrounded by General Howe. Not only were they surrounded, but the British had built a massive moat surrounding them within artillery range of their cannon. Washington now has only one way out of Brooklyn, and that's to cross the East River. And not to cross where I'm standing, remember, but to cross all the way back there, about 3 traffic lights in that direction, so quite a long way to go. And the East River, by the way, is very deep here. You can see the currents are strong, and just like today, it was rainy and the wind was blowing. Now, the night before, Washington and his men, including Major Benjamin Talmadge, all assumed the British would attack the next morning, come directly up into Brooklyn Heights, arrest them all, try them for treason, and hang them right there. And a number of Washington's officers had even written their last wills in anticipation of that. But Howe chose not to do that, and instead dig in for a siege on Brooklyn Heights. Now, coming up from the south was going to be a warship, dispatched by his older brother, Lord Admiral Richard Howe, which would block the Americans in right here. The Americans would be stuck in Brooklyn Heights, and they would stay until they starved, mutinied against Washington, or surrendered, or whatever would happen. So it really was not a bad plan on the part of the English. But look at the water today, and look at the way the wind is blowing. And on that day as well, the wind was blowing so hard to the south, our right, that the English couldn't get their ship into the East River. So Washington now is looking at a great escape route right across the East River to rejoin the rest of his army in Manhattan. Now they get word from Major General William Heath, who's up at the northern end of the island guarding the Kingsbridge crossing, that British ships have started to come in through the Long Island Sound, through the Hell's Gate. So the Americans realize that if they're going to move, they have to do it quickly. Washington sends out word for every type of floatable device to be gathered. They're all brought here to Brooklyn, and during the night, in total darkness, there was no moon that night, using no lanterns, they brought everything back to New York. And imagine how dark it would be here. There's no street lights, no building lights. It's just total darkness. The guys who are going to pull this off are a bunch of sailors from a little village called Marblehead on the coast of Massachusetts. There are the Marblehead Mariners, commanded by Colonel Glover and Hutchinson, and they're going to man those boats and ferry everybody across in waves. So they'll come across, dock way back there where we were standing before, unload what they have, and make their way back to Brooklyn Heights. Now, in the meantime, a group of Pennsylvania riflemen, some New Yorkers, and Major Benjamin Talmadge will be on watch facing the British troops, and they're going to keep their camps going all night so that General Howe doesn't figure out what's going on. And I think the best eyewitness account of this crossing comes from a pastor named Reverend Showkirk, who said he stood out here on the pier as all manner of floatable vessel made its way back and forth across the water. He said carrying everything you could imagine, from boxes of food, men, horses, cannon, tents, munitions. He said they would pile it all up to dry on the docks and head back for more. Now, this proceeds in an orderly manner, as Benjamin Talmadge tells us, until morning comes and the men on watch begin to panic and make their way back to the crossing. They're stopped by General Washington, who sends them back, and they wait and they wait. And Talmadge says, incredibly, a thick fog begins covering the city and Brooklyn and the East River. It's so thick that they cover and almost totally unable to see one shore from the other. I think Ben Talmadge said you couldn't see 6 feet in front of you. And miraculously, the fog stayed throughout the morning hours. They crossed everything back to New York. They didn't lose one man. They didn't lose a ship. They didn't lose a horse. They packed everything up, according to Pastor Showkirk, all the way back there by Water Street. They packed everything up and they marched north, off to the right, north of the town. And Reverend Showkirk said that later that morning, when the fog lifted, you could see the English walking around in Brooklyn Heights while the rebel army had completely disappeared. Washington himself said it was divine providence. We ought to have been taken at Brooklyn Heights. And think about it. Had Howe followed the directions of some of his officers and marched on Brooklyn Heights instead, they would have taken Washington, 5 of his generals, hanged them all right there, and caused massive disarray on the American side, perhaps even ending or at least delaying the Revolutionary War. So General Washington does the best he can do. He lives to fight another day, and his next battle will be in a couple weeks at Kips Bay, and I hope you'll join me there on September 15th when we'll talk about the Battle of Kips Bay.
Wow, so is that an incredible story or what? And you can see in the video the day I was standing there how hard the wind was blowing south on the East River, making it impossible for any of those ships to make it up into the East River. So that's a really incredible story that all of that came together the way it did. And today many people think it's God's will, it's a miraculous thing that they got across, but certainly it was the best Washington could possibly hope for at that point, to escape from being captured and hanged as a traitor. So now everyone has crossed the East River and they're preparing for the next battle. But before we end, I'd like to talk a little bit about the people who were there. So of course we have General Washington is there, but the guy we really want to talk about is John Glover. John Glover, who is in New York that summer from Marblehead, Massachusetts. Glover was a ship captain. He was a successful merchant. He was a wealthy man from Marblehead, and he raised a militia to help fight in the siege of Boston. His ship, the Hannah, was considered the first ever American naval ship. They used it as a privateering ship, right? Washington gave permission for some American ships to go out and harass British ships, to attack them, and if they could, board them and take the men and the contents. So this is like the privateering that went on before the Revolutionary War, if you remember that, right? Sailors were given a document from the crown called a letter of marque. And I think if you watch the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, you might know about a letter of marque. So the letter of marque kind of made you a legal pirate. And with that letter, you could go out with your ship. You could confront ships sailing in British waters that were not flying approved flags. And your guys would attack that ship. You would take everybody on it, the ship and the contents. You would then bring the people ashore and free them, but you would then sell the ship and the contents for yourself and your men. And of course, you gave a cut back to the government and you kept the rest. So that was privateering. So in the early part of the Revolutionary War, our naval force is going to be privateering, and the Hannah will be one of those first ships commissioned to do that. Washington comes to trust John Glover so much, seeing him as a capable man, his men also being very capable and dedicated, and Glover being a good commander, that he's going to begin to count on him more and more as the year 1776 goes by. And we can see in the Battle for New York, the crossing on August 29th, how key John Glover and his men will be in that effort. Now, facing the British that night in those camps that were set up as a decoy are a couple other people you may have heard of. A young man named Benjamin Talmadge, who I think at this point might just be a captain, be a major. He's definitely not a colonel yet, but Benjamin Talmadge, who you might know, is going to go on to form the great Culper spy ring that will operate during the Revolutionary War. And Colonel Edward Hand is there with his riflemen from the Lancaster area of Pennsylvania. Now, Hand's riflemen also fought in the siege of Boston, where they marched, I think, about 600 miles to fight in Boston, and they now have marched as well, now from Boston to New York, and they will be one of those decoy camps during the crossing. Hand's riflemen, if you watched my video from August 22nd, were also the first Americans to engage the Hessians at Gravesend when that landing occurred that started the battle. So Hand's men will be out there as well. So they're all out there manning those decoy camps, while Glover's regiments are ferrying everyone across the East River. Look at this. It's Mr. Quintus Maximus just opened the door and decided to join us here with his treat bowl in his mouth. Excuse me. I know he's a big crowd favorite that everyone loves. Quinty Man, come here, Quinty Man. So this is Quintus Maximus, for those of you who are interested in the Roman Empire, or the Roman Republic, I should say. He is named for Quintus Fabius Maximus, also known as Fabius the Delayer, a great Roman statesman. So here's Quintus Maximus. Here's a little look at him. I'm looking very cute. So let's get back to our story. Sorry about that. I hope you enjoyed that little diversion. So John Glover and his regiments are, as I mentioned, key to General Washington. He trusts them, they're capable, and when they propose the idea of crossing the East River, although most of the other men think this is a crazy idea, Washington trusts that they will be able to do this for him. And as we see, they do it. Now, one of the most incredible things about this story, if you're standing in that spot, is how close the harbor is. When I'm facing, Brooklyn to the right in that video, how close New York Harbor was, full of British warships, right? And the city packed with loyalists, that no one gets word to Admiral Howe that this is going on. It's pretty incredible that they don't figure out that it's going on about a little more than a quarter of a mile away. So it's really amazing that they pull this off. Now Washington has made it to New York. He has escaped General Howe, and he's going to regroup and prepare for the coming battles. Now, the Marblehead Mariners, we're not finished with John Glover and his regiments yet, because they are going to come up in 2 more videos this year about the battles of 1776. And one of those is a battle in New York that come up in October, and the other is a really famous one you should know about that happened Christmas of 1776. So thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed my video about Washington's miraculous escape in August of 1776. Please subscribe to my channel, like and share my videos, and I will be back with you in a few days with a video not about the battles themselves, but about the men who participated. And we'll talk a little bit about why ordinary men who'd never fought in a war packed up, went to New York, and were willing to try to fight the greatest military force in the world, even though they had been told again and again they would just die. It is such an inspiring story and one you should all know. So please subscribe to my channel so you don't miss it. And I'll be back in a few days with the stories of those men and maybe a few women too. So until next time, I'm Mrs. Q.